Eragon by Christopher Paolini, a First Chapter Friday Relove video with the Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Hey everybody, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week I'm going to be reading to you from Eragon by Christopher Paolini. And before I tell you what this book is about, I just have to share a few things. Number one, the book is just, at least the copy that I have, is just gorgeous. The cover is like this kind of rich, like matte, kind of textured paper, and it's got this gold lettering on the cover and on the spine. It matches my nails today, hooray. And it's navy blue, which is my favorite color. And then it's not even just the outside. The inside of the book is gorgeous too. It has a lot of these beautiful map illustrations and occasional like dragon type drawings. And it's just like, it's an experience to like hold and read this book, and it's just amazing. A few other things. It's the first in a series of 4. It's called the Inheritance Cycle. Cycle meaning 4 books. And just like a few of the other authors that I've shared with you recently, Christopher wrote this book at a very young age. It's his first one. Let me hear you. Guess. Shout it out loud. How old do you think Christopher was when he wrote this first book? If you said 17, you're wrong. If you said 12, you're wrong. If you said 15, you're right. And I think that that is just amazing. I know I've kind of waxed on about this before, but you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know what it was like, and I didn't know anybody who was a writer, and it didn't really feel possible, but like so many of the authors I share with you on this channel started when they were kids. They started when they were your age. And if it's something you want to do, then you should absolutely do it. All right, let's get back to the business at hand. I'm going to read you the back of the book so you know what this story is about. And then I'm going to read you the prologue, talk to you a little about what a prologue is, and then a very short chapter 1. Okay, here we go. One boy, one dragon, a world of adventure. When Eragon finds a polished blue stone in the forest, he thinks it is the lucky discovery of a poor farm boy. Perhaps it will buy his family meat for the winter. But when the stone brings a dragon hatchling, Eragon soon realizes he has stumbled upon a legacy nearly as old as the Empire itself. Overnight, his simple life is shattered, and he is thrust into a perilous new world of destiny, magic, and power. With only an ancient sword and the advice of an old storyteller for guidance, Eragon and the fledgling dragon must navigate the dangerous terrain and dark enemies of an empire ruled by a king whose evil knows no bounds. Can Eragon take up the mantle of the legendary dragon riders? The fate of the empire may rest in his hands. All right. I'm going to read to you first from the prologue. A prologue is a little part of a story that comes before the actual story starts, and they put it there specifically to give us some hints, to foreshadow, maybe to plant some seeds in our brain so that we can make some connections, draw some conclusions as the story is happening. It's important information that the author didn't want us to enter the story or the story world without. So let's see what kind of information Christopher needed us to know before we got to chapter 1 of Eragon. The prologue is called Shade of Fear. Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world. A tall shade lifted his head and sniffed the air. He looked human, except for his crimson hair and maroon eyes. He blinked in surprise. The message had been correct. They were here. Or was it a trap? He weighed the odds, and then said icily, "Spread out. Hide behind trees and bushes. Stop whoever is coming, or die." Around him shuffled 12 Urgles, with the short swords and round iron shields painted with black symbols. They resembled men with bowed legs and thick brutish arms made for crushing. A pair of twisted horns grew above their small ears. The monsters hurried into the brush, grunting as they did. Soon the rustling quieted, and the forest was silent again. The shade peered around a thick tree and looked up the trail. It was too dark for any human to see, but for him the faint moonlight was like sunshine streaming between the trees. Every detail was clear and sharp to his searching gaze. He remained unnaturally quiet, a long pale sword in his hand. A wire-thin scratch curved down the blade. The weapon was thin enough to slip between a pair of ribs, yet stout enough to hack through the hardest armor. The Urgles could not see as well as the shade. They groped like blind beggars fumbling with their weapons. An owl screeched, cutting through the silence. No one relaxed until the bird flew past. Then the monsters shivered in the cold night. One snapped a twig with its heavy boot. The shade hissed in anger, and the Urgles shrank back, motionless. He suppressed his distaste as they smelled like fetid meat, and turned away. They were tools to him, nothing more. The shade forced back his impatience as the minutes became hours. The scent must have wafted far ahead of its owners. He did not let the Urgles get up and warm themselves. He denied himself those luxuries too, and stayed behind the tree, watching the trail. Another gust of wind rushed through the forest. The smell was stronger this time. Excited, he lifted his thin lip in a snarl. "Get ready," he whispered, his whole body vibrating. The tip of his sword moved in small circles. It had taken many plots and much pain to bring himself to this moment. It would not do to lose control now. Eyes brightened under the Urgles' thick brows, and the creatures gripped their weapons tighter. Ahead of them the shade heard a clink as something hard struck a loose stone. Faint smudges emerged from the darkness and advanced down the trail. 3 white horses with riders cantered toward the ambush, their heads held high and proud, their coats rippling in the moonlight like liquid silver. On the first horse was an elf with pointed ears and elegantly slanted eyebrows. His build was slim but strong like a rapier. A powerful bow was slung on his back, a sword pressed against his side, opposite a quiver of arrows fletched with swan feathers. The last rider had the same fair face and angled features as the other. He carried a long spear in his right hand and a white dagger at his belt. A helm of extraordinary craftsmanship, wrought with amber and gold, rested on his head. Between these two rode a raven-haired elven lady who surveyed her surroundings with poise. Framed by long black locks, her deep eyes shone with a driving force. Her clothes were unadorned, yet her beauty was undiminished. At her side was a sword, and on her back a long bow with a quiver. She carried in her lap a pouch that she frequently looked after, as if to reassure herself that it was still there. One of the elves spoke quietly, but the shade could not hear what was said. The lady answered with obvious authority, and her guards switched places. The one wearing the helm took the lead, shifting his spear to a readier grip. They passed the shade's hiding place and the first few Urgles without suspicion. The shade was already savoring his victory when the wind changed direction and swept toward the elves, heavy with the Urgle stench. The horses snorted with alarm and tossed their heads. The riders stiffened, eyes flashing from side to side, then wheeled their mounts around and galloped away. The lady's horse surged forward, leaving her guards far behind. Forsaking their hiding, the Urgles stood and released a stream of black arrows. The shade jumped out from behind the tree and raised his right hand and shouted, "Gardalzla!" A red bolt flashed from his palm toward the elven lady, illuminating the trees with a bloody light. It struck her steed, and the horse toppled with a high-pitched squeal, plowing into the ground chest first. She leapt off the animal with inhuman speed, landed lightly, and then glanced back for her guards. The Urgle's deadly arrows quickly brought down the 2 elves. They fell from the noble horses, blood pooling in the dirt. As the Urgles rushed to the slain elves, the shade screamed, "After her! She is the one I want!" The monsters grunted and rushed down the trail. A cry tore from the elf's lips as she saw her dead companions. She took a step toward them, then cursed her enemies and bounded into the forest. While the Urgles crashed through the trees, the shade climbed a piece of granite that jutted above them. From his perch he could see all of the surrounding forest. He raised his hand and uttered, "Istilari Botek," and a quarter-mile section of the forest exploded into flames. Grimly he burned one section after another until there was a ring of fire, a half-league across around the ambush site. The flames looked like a molten crown resting on the forest. Satisfied, he watched the ring carefully in case it should falter. The band of fire thickened, contracting the area the Urgles had to search. Suddenly the shade heard shouts and a coarse scream. Through the trees he saw 3 of his charges fall in a pile, mortally wounded. He caught a glimpse of the elf running from the remaining Urgles. She fled toward a craggy piece of granite at a tremendous speed. The shade examined the ground 20 feet below and then jumped and landed nimbly in front of her. She skidded around and sped back to the trail. Black Urgle blood dripped from her sword, staining the pouch in her hand. The horned monsters came out of the forest and hemmed her in, blocking the only escape routes. Her head whipped around as she tried to find out. Seeing none, she drew herself up with regal disdain. The shade approached her with a raised hand, allowing himself to enjoy her helplessness. Get her. As Yergo surged forward, the elf pulled open the pouch, reached into it, and then let it drop to the ground. In her hands was a large sapphire stone that reflected the angry light of the fires. She raised it up over her head, lips forming frantic words. Desperate, the shade barked, "Garjala!" A ball of red flame sprang from his hands and flew toward the elf, fast as an arrow, but he was too late. A flash of emerald light briefly illuminated the forest, and the stone vanished. Then the red fire smote her, and she collapsed. The shade howled in rage and stalked forward, flinging his sword at a tree. It passed halfway through the trunk where it stuck, quivering. He shot 9 bolts of energy from his palm, which killed the Urgles instantly, and then ripped the sword free and strode to the elf. Prophecies of revenge, spoken in a wretched language only he knew, rolled from his tongue. He clenched his thin hands and glared at the sky. The cold stars stared back, unwinking, otherworldly watchers. Disgust curled his lip before he could turn back to the unconscious elf. Her beauty, which would have entranced any mortal man, held no charm for him. He confirmed that the stone was gone, then retrieved his horse from its hiding place among the trees. After tying the elf onto the saddle, he mounted the charger and made his way out of the woods. He quenched the fires in his path, but left the rest to burn. So we'll have to see further on how that connects to the main story, but either way, the author wanted us to know that information, that scene, those characters, before beginning. So let's begin. Chapter 1 is called Discovery. Eragon knelt in a bed of trampled reed grass and scanned the tracks with a practiced eye. The prince told him that the deer had been in the meadow only half an hour before. Soon they would bed down. His target, a small doe with a pronounced limp in her left forefoot, was still with the herd. He was amazed she had made it so far without a wolf or bear catching her. The sky was clear and dark, and a slight breeze stirred the air. A silvery cloud drifted over the mountains that surrounded him, its edges glowing with ruddy light cast from a harvest moon cradled between 2 peaks. Streams flowed down the mountain from solid glaciers and glistening snowpacks. A brooding mist crept along the valley's floor, almost thick enough to obscure his feet. Eragon was 15, less than a year from manhood. Dark eyebrows rested above his intense brown eyes. His clothes were worn from work. A hunting knife with a bone handle was sheathed at his belt, and a buckskin tube protected his yew bow from the mist. He carried a wood frame pack. The deer had led him deep into the spine, a range of untamed mountains that extended up and down the land of Allegacia. Strange tales and men often came from those mountains, usually boding ill. Despite that, Eragon did not fear the spine. He was the only hunter near Carvajal who dared track game deep into its craggy recesses. It was the 3rd night of the hunt, and his food was half gone. If he did not fell the doe, he would be forced to return empty-handed. His family needed the meat for the rapidly approaching winter, and he could not afford to buy it in Carvajal. Eragon stood with quiet assurance in the dusky moonlight, and then strode into the forest toward the glen where he was sure the deer would rest. The trees blocked the sky from view and cast feathery shadows on the ground. He looked at the tracks only occasionally. He knew the way. At the glen he strung his bow with sure touch, and then drew 3 arrows and nocked one, holding the others in his left hand. The moonlight revealed 20 or so motionless lumps where the deer lay in the grass. The doe he wanted was at the edge of the herd, her left forelegs stretched out awkwardly. Eragon slowly crept closer, keeping the bow ready. All his work of the past 3 days had led this moment. He took a last steadying breath, and an explosion of light shattered the night. The herd bolted. Eragon lunged forward, racing through the grass as fiery winds surged past his cheek. He slid to a stop and loosed an arrow at the bounding doe. It missed by a finger's breadth and hissed into the darkness. He cursed and spun around, instinctively nocking another arrow. Behind him, where the deer had been, smoldered a large circle of grass and trees. Many of the pines stood bare of their needles. The grass outside the charring was flattened. A wisp of smoke cleared in the air, carrying a burnt smell. In the center of the blast radius lay a polished blue stone. Mist snaked across the scorched area and swirled in substantial tendrils over the stone. Eragon watched for danger for several long minutes, but the only thing that moved was the mist. Cautiously, he released the tension from his bow and moved forward. Moonlight cast him in a pale shadow as he stopped before the stone. He nudged it with an arrow and then jumped back. Nothing happened, so he warily picked it up. Nature had never polished a stone as smooth as this one. Its flawless surface was dark blue, except for thin veins of white that spiderweb across it. The stone was cool and frictionless under his fingers, like hardened silk. Oval and about a foot long, it weighed several pounds, though it felt lighter than it should have. Eragon found the stone both beautiful and frightening. Where did it come from? Does it have a purpose? Then a more disturbing thought came to him. Was it sent here by accident? Or was I meant to have it? If he had learned anything from the old stories, it was to treat magic and those who used it with great caution. But what should I do with the stone? It would be tiresome to carry, and there was a chance it was dangerous. It might be better to leave it behind. A flicker of indecision ran through him, and he almost dropped it. But something stayed his hand. At the very least, it might pay for some food, he decided with a shrug, tucking the stone into his pack. The glen was too exposed to make a safe camp, so he slipped back into the forest and spread his bedroll beneath the upturned roots of a fallen tree. After a cold dinner of bread and cheese, he wrapped himself in the blankets and fell asleep, pondering what had occurred. If you want to find out what happens to Eragon and this mysterious blue stone that he has found, you should pick up a copy of this book at your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or you can always grab it via the link in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me for another First Chapter Friday. I hope I will see you here again next week for another one. Happy reading! To continue reading Eragon by Christopher Paolini, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the description box. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist I have for you on my channel. This week's mystery quote says, "Books are my friends, my companions. They make me laugh and cry and find meaning in life." Thanks so much for joining me on my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you'll come back again for more First Chapter Friday videos, brain breaks, and other great content. You can find me online at these places, which I've linked below. See you again next time, and happy reading!